Welcome back to SideQuest VIII, episode 15. Back with me is my perennial companion and party member, Wes Schantz. Wes, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Happy
How's it going?
Memorial Day weekend to you. Bad American that I am. I'll be flying out to Oxford on Monday for one conference and then either staying in England, probably not, or flying back here to do another conference with you via Zoom
Yeah,
on video games, the occult, in pretty early June. I think it's, I can't say definitely, but something like June 12th to 14th. Um, and we'll both be presenting on various Square games. I'm presenting on Final Fantasy VIII, and I think you're presenting on was it Final Fantasy VII that you were presenting
yeah,
on?
yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. And and I know that that is the schedule is published, and so I can on the description for this video put the link to that if anybody is very in a very timely way watching this, or if they'd like to check up on us years in the future. Hopefully URLs still exist and the internet and all of that. Um,
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of alternate futures and diverging paths, last time we got to a place of somewhat freedom, not unrestricted freedom yet, because we don't yet have a true airship, but we have something of a ship now that can cover water. And we can cover water for the first time, and occasionally we can sort of glitch and jump between some islands, which I was having some fun doing. Though I had no success
Mhm.
going underneath this large New Orleans-like bridge across the sea that Fisherman's Horizon is connected to.
Yeah.
Couldn't quite get to that last continent yet. In any case, you chose to do some card quest, play some Shumi tribe stuff, and to go get King Tomberry. So I want to hear about your experiences while also sadly explaining to our listeners how linear and boring I am, and perhaps what a good fit I am for new games like Clair Obscur and Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy 15, where with linear pathways, because I've just gone from trying to save Balamb Garden to Trabia Garden now, and had quite a few revelations there, huge revelations that I think we have mentioned in passing in former episodes, but finally, I'm not going to only be talking about disorientation and becoming further disoriented in this world. There are large questions that have loomed and been and have arisen due to what we've learned at Trabia Garden, but really a lot all at once has been answered. But so I apologize to listeners and to you for being a linear, boring, uncreative video game player. Uh, but um, but that said, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience going in variegated ways.
Sure. So the bridge that you're talking about is the train track, right? And Fisherman Horizon, there's somebody in there who talks about how you could walk along it if you wanted to get to Estar.
Mm.
Um, I don't think that's actually possible. Like, I think there's debris in the way or something stops you from doing that if you try to go through the train station there. So yeah, it ends up being a an obstacle rather than a viaduct, which is kind of ironic. But there's at least two ways to get around it if you wanted to. You can go along it till you get to one of the continents, the one that has like Galbadia and all that stuff, and you can cross the continent itself by finding some sand, some beaches on the east side, then the west side, and then you can go around it. Or you can just keep going north until north wraps around to the southern end of everything. And that's another way to get there. And that might be the simpler way actually, because the first thing that I did was actually the Shumi village quest. I think I mentioned it last time. It's like a cliche of role-playing games, especially JRPGs, that you have to go find this item for this person in town for them to give you the next thing or open the next door that allows you to go on with your actual quest. And so, in a lot of cases, those aren't true side quests. They're just sort of like elements of the puzzle that is the game. In this case, though, it's purely bonus content. Like, there's no real reason to do anything in Shumi Village. It's very remote, but it does show up on the map for some reason. It's one of the few locations that actually is an indicator on the world map, at least in the original version of the game that I'm playing. I think some of the remakes allow you to do like fast travel, where if you can see a thing on the map, you can just like click on it and go to it, and so skip over the actual journey. But I can't do that. So anyway, in Shumi Village, there is a kind of dome, and even the music there is actually reminiscent of like the village of the ancients from Final Fantasy
Oh,
VII. It has
oh,
very
really?
much that feel. Yeah, and when you go in, there's a drop point that's guarded by Shumi um, villagers, and they charge you 5,000 gil to use it, but it's I think very well worth it because it's an Ultima drop point. So a
Oh, wow.
lot like in Fisherman Horizon, right? There's that one Ultima drop point. This one actually replenishes pretty quickly though, and since a lot of what you're doing in this side quest is walking around, um, it's going to replenish over and over in the course of the side quest. So I ended up boosting my strength quite a bit by just going back and paying them money. And so maybe that's how the Shumi make all their money too. We know why Master Norg is so loaded now.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, there's like an elevator that takes you down uh, to the actual village, and everything there is kind of like covered in almost like the shell of a turtle, kind of like this very organic and protective and serene sort of feeling. Um, in the hotel, uh, the little Shumi guy like has to come up on his own little elevator to reach the height of the desk. He's so tiny. So we are learning a little bit about like the ways in which the Shumi metamorphose, and transform and evolve. That's the word, right? So there's at least a few different forms that they can take. And one of them is this tiny form. Uh, one of them is the Moombas. We learned that in the course of this side quest. And the other is to be an elder. Um, Now it turns out that Norg is mentioned only at the very end of this and only in passing. Uh, they don't seem to care about him or for him at all. Um, they're very interested in Laguna, however.
Hmm.
So they're the whole thing involves the artisans and the craftsmen. They're apparently like miners, so they have all this stone and precious rock and stuff. And they're building the statue of Laguna because they sensed in him a quality that I think they call like the ability to attract people. But I guess you could, translate it as charisma or something like that, a personal magnetism. Um, when he was wounded there. So I think this is another Laguna sequence that we haven't seen yet, where
Hmm.
he's going to get wounded again. I don't think it's the same time as when he ends up in Windhill Village that we already played through. Um, but at any rate, um, you got to go around and find the different rocks. All of them are within the Shumi village. And if you get stuck, I think there's some hints that one of the Shumi will give you about where to look for it. But basically, you just walk around the village clicking, you know, mashing X until you find the rock that you're looking for, bring it back to the craftsman, and drawing Ultima. There's a Firaga, there's a Blizzaga. So there's all
Oh,
these
wow.
good draw points as you walk around. You just like, you're getting paid for your seed level. You're getting powerful spells to junction if you need them. And basically, it emerges that these stones were completely superfluous. Like there's no actual reason for them. They just wanted you to get to know their village and to spend time there. And they say this pretty straight out. Um, and Squall proves to be very like perceptive in this regard. Like he's the one who sort of notices or puts his finger on this being the reason that they're doing this. He's sleeping, William. Oh, I know, I know. I can't right now. Anyway, um, so you wound up getting rewarded with a another kind of like Zen koan type joke where the elder holds out his empty hand, and this is the reward. But then it turns out that you get Phoenix Pinion item at the end of that. So you do end up getting a concrete reward for this, but it's very much a the journey is the destination kind of thing. Um, I haven't used it yet, but apparently the Phoenix Pinion will summon the Phoenix GF, and it's one of these GFs that you can't junction, but that just will randomly occur if ever your party is all knocked out. There's like a small chance that the Phoenix will revive everyone and give you another shot at that battle. So I'm holding on to it. Um, I don't know if I'll ever need it or if I ever get to that point in the battle, I would just restart the battle anyway because I'm clearly doing something wrong. Um, but anyway, it's more for the experience of just chilling in the village. It's like Fisherman's Horizon, but more so, like in terms of passivity, calm, um, slowness of pace of their life there. And it actually involves going back to Fisherman Horizon so that you can if you remember the grease monkey had that little Moomba doll or whatever that like hangs out in his entranceway. Um, when you go back, he'll loan that to you and you can take it to the Shumi village and it will function as like a transmitter where the artisan will hear the voice of the grease monkey from Fisherman's Horizon telling him to like help out with the statue already. Um, and so he does, and then he ends up deciding that maybe he'll try to evolve into a human, although he's never heard of that being done. So some weird, um, convoluted exploration of the world map slash exploration of this village. Um, Again, a lot of dialogue and a kind of self-referential quality to this, where there's this thing about the artisans working on a statue of a person in the game who we haven't actually met, but of course we, experienced memories with him, of him. Um, so by doing all these things, you are facilitating not the actual making of the statue, because it wouldn't make sense to like bring more stone for that, right? They're hewing it out of a block of stone. Um, but rather you're facilitating a kind of exchange among the artisans there and a like appreciation of their way of life. Um, so I found it really amusing. I mean, it's a little bit long. It takes a lot of back and forth, and I wonder a little bit if the draw points are like a kind of uh, compensation for that, for the player to feel like what they're doing is going to be rewarded in a concrete way. Um, but honestly, I mean, I think this is what a lot of people like about this game is just being in the world, exploring it, listening to the music, playing cards, stuff like that. Um, so it's just a lot of that, really. Um, we don't really learn much more about Laguna, which is what I was kind of expecting. All that we learn is that he was there and he was very much appreciated by these people. Um, so yeah, so that's the Shumi village. Um, right next door to it is the first Chocobo forest, and
Hmm.
the Chocobo forests involve like again walking around pushing the button until something happens. There is a kind of puzzle quality to them, but I don't really understand how it works. Like little chocobos will drop down or they'll fly back up. And when there's only one of them, if you talk to it, the chocobo that you can ride will appear. And if you then go around and click some more, that chocobo will go and dig up stones. So again, kind of a similar thing. These are the kind though that you can refine into spells. Um, and there's at least one chocobo forest on like every main continent. I think if you find them all, there's a card at the end of the little chocobo, and I'm pretty sure that you need that to do the next bit of the Queen of Cards. So again, it's like circling back around to this idea of you know, the card game, the walking around, the admiring the beautiful scenery, um, basically just chilling and not progressing the plot at all. Um, I I think there's at least one forest that I couldn't figure out how to get to yet. So I haven't completed that one yet. And in the course of doing that, so my final one, there is kind of an archipelago down in the south, and it's all sort of blasted and broken up. And I didn't see any villages there, but there is a building that appears to be the lighthouse and the stone house that we hear about from the past. So the orphanage um, is down there, and you can't go into it. You just like sort of look at it and say, "Oh, that looks familiar," and then you walk away. Um, but there is also this weird kind of like um, almost like a radio tower looking thing. Uh, when you go in there, a timer will start. So a voice will say, "I'm Odin, come and fight me," basically. Um, and you have this 20-minute timer to go and defeat Odin. But actually, that's like a terrible idea because Odin is again a randomly appearing GF that just wipes out any enemies that you happen to be fighting. And a lot of times when you're fighting enemies, you don't want to defeat them. You want to turn them into cards or mug them, steal something from them, or draw from them magic, right? So I did not get Odin yet. Instead, the randomly appearing enemies here are the Tonberry. So the little lizard guys wearing cloaks. They have their chef knife and the ominous way that they sort of like waddle towards you. If they reach you, they will stab you and you die in one hit. It's a death attack. If they don't reach you, they will occasionally counterattack with a spell called Everyone's Grudge, and it's like a multiplier times the number of enemies that the character has killed. So I think it's 20 times however many characters or enemies your characters kill. So it can do a lot of damage against certain members of your party, right? So the trick to fighting these guys is basically like anything in this game, counterintuitive. You got to stay at low HP because they'll one shot you anyway. And you got to use your limit breaks to defeat them quickly. And so it's again having a lot of ultimate spells junction to your strength, and then just spamming Renzo Kuken on them makes this pretty doable. It still takes a long time because you got to kill 20 of them. So there's that number again. And on the 20th Tonberry, the um, the battle doesn't end, and instead this giant Tonberry appears, and he is wearing a crown and has a few different attacks, but basically he's just the same but with more HP. And when you defeat him, he joins your party as a GF. So a very well hidden secret GF here. Um, Selphie mentioned something in Trabia about like finding a GF when she was fighting enemies when she was training one time. And so it's kind of like that. And someone in Trabia mentions the Tonberries as well. Like it just randomly kind of like disconnected speech about a Tonberry thing. So there are like some hints that this is possible, but again, I don't know how you would ever find this without a guide. It's ridiculous. Um, it should be mentioned too that the time limit doesn't really matter for this. As long as you leave and go back in, it doesn't reset the number of enemies you defeated. So you can just do that as many times as you need to without any consequences. So this one took me a while. I think it's worth it because you get an extra GF that's able to junction stuff to luck, and it allows you to buy certain things in shops that don't otherwise show up, which I think is important later. I'm not really sure. Um, but it was more of like, you know, I'm all the way down here for this chocobo thing anyway. Let me try to do this side quest. And I don't know, it doesn't actually overpower you very much because you're not gaining experience and you're gaining one AP at a time. But as you mentioned, there's another island down there where you can like max out all your GFs really quickly because you get 20 AP from fighting the Cactuar enemy. You can like get close enough to the Cactuar island that they'll appear even though you're not actually there yet. So there's some, I don't know if they're oversights on the developers' part or just things that they hid there for people who wanted to just destroy everything left in this game. Um, I did not do that. I have learned most of what my GFs can learn anyway at this point, so I'll wait till I get a few more GFs, I guess, and go back. But yeah, so those are those are the three side quests. There's some like a add-on for this game called Chocobo World. I think it's like hardware that you plug into the PS2. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do it. I haven't looked it up, but it like changes the save function of the game is permanently changed once you have played the Chocobo side quest. Um, it like allows you to save, but it also allows you to go and do this other thing called Chocobo World, which I think you have to buy something for that. I don't know. I have no idea what that is. I have um, very little interest in finding out actually, but it's a thing. So there's that. Yeah, I think you can do a lot of other things. Like you can go back to Win Hill. You can go back to all the other towns that we've been to so far and do various side quests. But those are the ones that I prioritized for now. Um, yeah. Any thoughts on that? Does that sound like a thing that you would ever do?
Well, what I really like about that is it's interesting because it's almost like an education or a book where one has put in the requisite amount of time through the tutorials and the basic learning curve. In fact, actually, the example I think of is martial arts, where many black belts tell the story of starting as a white belt and then they attain black belt status and think they're experts, but then they attain master status, which is depending on the martial art, like a 10th dan, like a 10th degree black belt, sometimes maybe more like a 5th or a 6th degree. But by that time, one's black belt has frayed and turned white again. And so Bruce Lee has a saying that is, again, analogous to this. He says, when I first started martial arts, I thought a punch was just a punch. He's like, once I became more of an expert, I thought that a punch was much more than a punch. But once I became a master, I realized that a punch was just a punch again. And so something something about the nature of these side quests is that it's as if for you are rewarded for putting in the time by being given freedom of how you spend your time. And so you are not you are not accelerated through the story. I accelerated, and maybe that was my own reward because I'm so story driven. I just want to go, go, go. But ultimately, of course, that strategy won't continue to work because I will have had to take some time to bolster my characters either by shooting up their AP when I can, or turning various monsters into cards so that I can have the items necessary to then produce strong weapons, or go and get GFs that help me to do any number of things like those. These are the sort of the hidden elements that that help one to progress near the end game when things really get hard, and they really get hard at the end of this game. Particularly the last boss is extremely difficult. And so something that I see here is it's almost like all these analogies I'm putting on top of each other: education, martial arts, Bruce Lee, being a Navy SEAL. Is that one attains this high level and this level of transportability or mobility, and then one is allowed freedom of expression and freedom of play. So whereas I've gone basically straight to Trabia after putting on this farcical, terrible show with Selphie, you're allowed to play the game in the way that you want, and you have a more expansive way of spending your time. Again, you note there's another timer, just like with a Freet, just like with Dalet. Now we have also Odin, and
Yeah.
and those randomly occurring GFs are also very interesting for what we just learned in Trabia, which we'll get into, I think, in just a second here about the nature of the GFs. Still some questions about them, but one question certainly was answered about them. But now, you're really allowed to play as the player that you are. You can play cards. I'm playing a lot of cards. I just got the Quistis card from her groupie in the classroom,
Nice.
which I'm very happy of. I have like 5 Bigs and Weds cards now too. And yeah, I'm starting to win a lot more than I used to, except for when I went to, I think Dalet has the random rule going on right now, and maybe even Timber.
Uh,
Not
uh,
Battle, not other places, but I refuse to play at those places. I also, speaking of using time and the nature of time and how the developers allow you to uncover more of this world and just spend time in this world and appreciate the intelligence of this world, is I returned to Timber, which has a bunch of expensive and useful items for GFs, like one 5,000 gil item teaches, I think, the GF any ability that they have, or it's some sort of just general GF ability. And so I got a few of those, and I'm looking forward to using them pretty soon. Like with the brothers and the HP plus 80%. It's just sort of random. That's again using my ethos of randomly rolling around the world and seeing what I can find, which again I don't think is the best strategy. But I did end up back at Timber, and I ran around Timber a little more because I didn't spend much time there when we first met Renoa, or the owls there, and the forest owls. And so I wanted to look at it. That said, I did go find Trabia. And one thing I wanted to bring up about Trabia is a theme that we've talked about a couple times. As frustrating as it can be, it's a very illuminating theme, particularly with the music of Nobuo Uematsu. One of, like the two great names in video game music. I'm forgetting what the name of. I think it might be Sakuraba, who the one who did Chrono Trigger and the multiple Xenosagas as well.
Yeah. Mitsuda. Yeah.
Mitsuda. Yes, exactly. And so something interesting about Trabia as we get there, it's been blown to hell. It direct hit. And so there's a huge parallel there with Balamb Garden, right? And also juxtaposition. They got hit. But there are people still alive. And so there's all this rubble, and students are trying to put things back together. There's literally a missile in the middle of their old stage area, and they're wishing they were getting more guidance from their instructors. So apparently their instructors are lacking in some way or another. We find a basketball court that's all rubble. And a friend of Selphie's who's really happy to see Selphie, and this seems to cheer up Selphie a little bit, just to find a survivor, as it were. But what I wanted to mention is that when we first get there, there's the music is reminiscent of Garden. It is not the same as the Balamb Garden theme, but again, it has that basic melodic riff of the dun 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 dun, but then it goes to a different note. But what's interesting with the music that you first hear in Trabia is that it's discordant. There are discordant elements. There are untuned elements. It's like it's being played on an untuned piano, like dun 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 dun. The music sounds busted in the same way that the place appears busted because it has been viciously attacked by powerful rockets and suffered a direct hit. But when everybody returns to the basketball court, and then you talk to everybody, and a basketball rolls across the cracked ground, and Selphie returns, the music changes again. And the music changes to a theme much closer to Balamb Gardens, and also no longer discordant. Very similar to when our team is reunited in Fisherman's Horizon, and the people get in Renoa, in my case, Renoa, Irvine, or Irving and Selphie get out of that busted machine from the missile silo that they must have housed themselves in during the explosion, and then the music changes again back to the Balamb Garden theme. And so what I think we see happening again with the music in Nobuo Uematsu is this is another moment of a return home. And the first return home was when the group got back together, not when Squall returned to Balamb Garden, when the music was significantly not Balamb Garden's usual home music. And so that music returns when the group gets back together. And here, Selphie has returned to Trabia, but that's not her home, and it's also been destroyed, so it's no longer function. It can no longer be really a home at this moment. But what makes the Balamb music start again is when again she rejoins with her group from Balamb Garden. It's not the people around Trabia that make that music happen again. It's not them she's reconnecting with necessarily. It's her home group, and then during this sequence, we get tremendous evidence for why this is. We finally get some huge, huge insights. Just three of them. All of these people in our group grew up together in an orphanage, including Irvine from Galbadia Garden and Selphie from Trabia Garden. And this perhaps where the plot starts to get stretched very thin. Seifer was apparently there too. Renoa's the only one who wasn't there of all the people in our group. Quistis was there, Bossy, so was Zell. Why does nobody remember each other? Oh, and of course, also the giant revelation that they were all orphans. So Zell actually learns that he is an orphan and that his parents are not his actual parents. They're his adopted parents here. So that's huge for Zell. But even so, he takes it in stride and he's like, you know what? They adopted me though, so I'm going to do my best for them. And it's like, that's great, Zell, but wow, that's a huge thing to learn out of nowhere. But let's see. So, but the person who runs the adoption, the lighthouse, the cottage that you said, was a woman named Matron. The woman named Matron was Idea, and not only that, there was another older girl there who Squall really loved as a big sister, and her name was Elone. So we know about one sorceress being there, and we know about another potential sorceress having been there, and all of these connections between these people who have been, and Squall's gotta effing hate this, ostensibly drawn together by fate. And they've come back together, and only Irving remembers this. But why does he remember this? Well, because apparently all these, and we got some insight into this very early on about the nature of GFs and other people and people's not necessarily using them. But Guardian forces apparently junction to the brain, a part of the brain, and a part of the brain that's responsible for memory. So in junctioning them, one starts to lose one's memory. And it seems to be progressive because none of these characters remember growing up in the orphanage except for Irving, who has only recently junctioned at GF. And the reason that Selphie apparently forgot everything, and this is another not extremely strong moment in Final Fantasy VIII, is that she ostensibly found a GF, perhaps like Tonberry King, in an enemy after defeating them and junctioned it for a little while. But apparently the GF was so Alzheimer's causing, that amnesia causing, that she can't even remember which GF it was. But perhaps it was Tonberry, as you suggested. You've done some good sleuthing around there. So we've learned a little about the nature of the GFs, the past of these individuals, the fact that they've been drawn together, the fact that they're connected to each other and to Matron and to Elene in ways that they don't know. And it's Irving, of all people, the space cowboy, who tells us this. Who just one other note from something we talked about earlier with why did Martine choose him? Apparently he's not a seed. Why is he not a seed? I was under the impression the entire time that I mean seeds come from gardens. And so what is he? Is he still a student? Are the sharpshooters different in some way? Like, I guess he had never junctioned a Guardian force until he joined us, and so what is he? And so we learn all of these things, and it's like, my God, wow. What, orphans altogether, forgot, GF's cause forgetting. It's worth it to forget. And then we even we have this huge moment of choice where Renoa seems to have been touched by, to some extent, by the ethos of FH. And she's like, do we really have to fight? And again, Squall thinks through, it'd be nice not to fight, but we really have to. And he's not sharing his emotions as much, but it's Irving that comes out and really gives a good explanation. He's like, I know it's a bummer to forget your past and the people you love, but I think it's worth it to keep fighting. And Squall even thinks, he's like, don't you understand? I'm a seed from Balamb Garden. We fight, we're like Navy SEALs. We fight, don't you get it? That's what I am. And so I guess I really like some input, some insight, some comment on all these revelations that frankly, they came out of left field for me, because I did not remember that we got them all here and from the great luminary of Irving, who again, Why is he not a seed? What is he if he's not a seed?
Yeah. No, I was also kind of bowled over what I remember this part happening, but I don't remember the specifics of it, right? And I guess that kind of is part of the funny thing about it is since it's all about memory, um,
Of course, yeah.
the ways in which it does and does not stick in your mind after 20 years, uh,
Too many
having
GFs. Too many
experienced
GFs.
a few other things in the meantime, maybe junctioned a few GFs, who knows? The thing about the way this is portrayed, though, like you mentioned, it takes place on the basketball court. And so it's staged as a kind of conversation in a space where a game should be happening. Right?
Mm,
The game
mm,
can't happen because the court is destroyed. This made me think of your playground thing from FF7, actually,
yes.
right? It's
Yes.
kind of an echo of that sort of image, a space where play should be happening and it cannot for whatever reason. But of course it is because we're playing the game, right? It's just that in this moment, the game is um, just conversation. It's conversation and it's memory and you can move Squall around within the memories, right? He's this kind of like ethereal, almost like the reflection that we saw in
Yes.
Fisherman's Horizon on the solar panels. He's like that, only he walks around and interacts with stuff in the world of the memory. Um, Chiefly himself, right? He can talk to the small version of himself that's there, and he sort of says, "Oh, how pathetic he was," you know. But there is an element of him processing feelings, although not really sharing them yet.
Mm.
Um, so I think we're seeing some growth from him. I think that we're seeing a little bit of character development from Irvine, although it's very confusing and out of nowhere. Um, it also is really strange how the um, the part that we didn't talk about yet is like we have to go back to Balamb town, right? Um, Before all this happens, Selphie won't join your party, right? She's still processing the terrible concert and the stuff that it was supposed to help her process in the first place, which was the loss of um, her home garden and Trabia. And so when you do that, you see Fujin and Raijin after doing
Yes.
some sleuthing and some kind of nonsense running around that town. Um, and they talk about how they have, of course, thrown in their lot with their friend Seifer, right? So they
Cypress.
they are his um, ride till they die friends, and their loyalty for him transcends any other consideration.
Yes.
And and I think that we're juxtaposing our party's discussion here with that kind of thing. Um, and I think that they are different. We get another GF in the course of that battle from Fujin, a wind um, pandemona, I think is what it's
Mhm.
called, but
Uh-huh.
you know, sort of a demonic wind god force. Um, if you look up their names, Fujin and Raijin, it turns out that they are traditional deities of the winds and storms.
Ah,
And there's like a myth about them, um, you know, trying to stand up to Buddha when he showed up and getting schooled. And so, yeah. Anyway, we had talked a while ago about like their speech patterns and stuff. When I was looking that up later, I saw that thing about the wind god stuff, and that makes sense, kind of, in this case. Um, okay. Hmm. I think it's hanging over there, William. Sorry. So I think you know, the way that they are in Seifer's company, um, and loyal to him is supposed to be kind of, you know, contrasted with the way that our characters have joined together um, out of this shared, you know, mission to defeat the sorceress. Um, but they're sort of without without a true unifying uh I don't know, like they don't have that same personal connection with one another, um, at least not until they've gone on this journey and experienced some of this hardship. And so, I mean, I kind of think that the the trade-off of we can have these experiences together at the expense of our memories of this pastime, I think that that is precisely what we're supposed to like sort of see as opposed to um, Fujin and Raijin holding on to their memory of their friend and yeah, and just getting destroyed by our party over and over, and not apparently minding, right? So there's a weird kind of mirror image that's happening there. Yeah, I think it is kind of interesting that it's supposed to be like a homecoming for Zell. He has to be in your party, I think, for this part. Um, you can finally go up to his room, right, and see what's in there. It's uh, like a weird little shrine to his grandfather, who, of course, yeah, is not blood related to him, it seems. So you would think that maybe he would have a little bit more to work through it this time, but he seems to just kind of take it all in stride. Um, yeah, no, there's a lot packed into this relatively short bit of gameplay here. Um, yeah, and like you said, there's nothing really to do in Trabia other than wander around, um, and then experience all this flashback kind of lore drop happening. Um,
Yeah,
so
it's interesting that you mentioned that Trabia, the conversation happens at a place of play where we're doing story time instead of play, very Socratic, like a Platonic dialogue there, right? They're at a wrestling gymnasium, but they end up talking with Socrates instead. But it's interesting because this is also a time in the game when you are not really playing, right? You're not fighting against any enemies. There are no puzzles to solve, and there are no bosses to defeat at Trabia
yeah,
Garden. You really just talk there. And so it is somewhat dull, but it is also stark and important because the game is saying, okay, we need to pause for a moment and develop something. And we're actually going to take a good bit of time. I correlated this point to the D District prison at the beginning of Disc 2 because it just takes a long time to get through all this, even though it's not a bunch of back and forth like D District or like Shumi, the Shumi tribe.
yeah,
But to your larger point, about going back to Balamb and about Fujin and Rajan. Something interesting about that is, so even though we're talking about it after Trabia, that occurs prior to Trabia. And so we
mhm,
get to learn a bunch about Zell's home life just before learning, like him, that he is adopted. And so it should be all the more shocking, good storytelling because of that. But a couple things you said about Fujin and Rajan make me think, I want to put another hypothesis forward that part of the juxtaposition with Seifer, it could be that they, like Pandemonium, which is itself the in Milton's Paradise Lost, the castle in hell raised by Mulciber, the Hephaestian demon. Um,
mm,
they could be falling with Seifer. Seifer being their sort
mm,
of North Pole, but now he's south. He's fallen south, and if he's their North Pole, well, they're going to be disoriented with him. But I also
mm,
want to suggest that possibly he is further devolving into the unconscious, insofar as he is following what might be an unconscious anima projection or ideal, like the sorceress, rather than, and maybe there's a too patriarchal statement, rather than patriarchal Sid and Garden, though Garden is itself a feminine symbol.
mhm,
And there's an incompleteness to Garden, right? Because Matron is supposed to be there too, but she's not. And so, it's sort of like a Catholic theology prior to Vatican II when Mary was assumed into heaven. It needed some feminine element there, the wisdom above the waters that even the Old Testament had. But what you say about Fujin and Rajan is that they might too represent a theory insofar as they are typical thunder and wind spirits, and they absorb thunder and wind magic. And
mhm,
and she uses wind magic, and Rajan is a barely articulate buffoon, uses physical attacks mostly. Of course, there's a bit of a prejudice against physicality in these games. But even though you can be quite strong, it depends on the RPG. Some RPGs, physical fighters are stronger, some they're not. In this game, GFs are king. But even though they are the friends of Seifer, one wonders if they're more like aspects of his personality or like archetypal friends. Not, I don't want to say imaginary friends because they are real within the mise en scène of the game, but there are elements of them that make them suggest that they're parts of a personality, right? Rajan is one.
Mm.
They're both one dimensional. One literally speaks in one word, exclamations, and has an eye patch, suggesting a one-dimensional lack of perspective like a Cyclops, right? And also a one-dimensional adherence and faith in Seifer. You recall that they had a weird, undefined role even within the Balamb Garden, and one wondered whether they gave it to themselves, the so-called disciplinary committee, which I think Seifer was the head of, right?
Yeah.
Which I think meant basically the hazing committee. But so Seifer, even his buddies are less and less real to me, right? Like, even though I think you could make an argument that in some ways Rajan and Fujin are more real than Squall's companions because they're not drawn together by fate and ostensibly they actually have some level of personal attraction to each other. And so they have more of a natural human relationship than Squall with these people he grew up with but forgot and has just fallen back in with somehow. And God knows whether Sid knew this the whole time, and when he met Selphie, was he putting all this together? One would imagine so at this point. But are Fujin and Rajan, are they supposed to function as representatives of awesome friends who perhaps fall from grace with you? And is that supposed to be a positive or a negative symbol? Or are they supposed to further represent Seifer's sort of moving away from realist reality more towards archetypal knightly storm cloud reality? Are his is part of the reason that he was so vitiated at the end of disc one, again, that he's living in his imagination, he's not actively training in the same way that we are actually fighting through the world and becoming literally stronger within the world, stronger and stronger. And so that's something I wonder. What are we to think of the relationship with between Seifer and Fujin and Rajan? Is it like a friendship of the good, like Aristotle would say is an excellent friendship? Or is there a pathological neurotic element to it? Or is it itself supposed to be representative of something less than a human relationship? I mean, even in the end credits, and I won't say too much about this, one still gets the inclination that Seifer is in charge of them and they have a strange subordinate relationship to him, though they very much lack direction in that moment. We see them fishing, which is like
Nice.
the archetypal, what are you doing with your self activity? The archetypal non-directed activity.
Yeah. No, so that's a powerful symbol throughout this game, right? This idea of just waiting and seeing what you catch, right? Drawing magic, right? Yeah, I think that would redeem them in my reading of the game so far anyway. If that's how they end up by the end. You can steal some really good stuff from them. So they have like reserves that are powerful. Um, you draw the Pandemona GF, you can draw other spells from them, but also they have like some items. I think it's another Mega Elixir or a hero. The hero is an item that makes you invulnerable during battle, that you can steal from Fujin, and the strength up. So just adding to your strength stat, you can draw from or steal from Raijin. Um, they serve as this kind of like um, like stock of of concrete, useful things, as well as they serve as this kind of counterpoint to your own party. And if what we're doing is good, then I think we have to acknowledge that their stance in following Seifer all the way down is the wrong choice. Now at the same time, even Squall sort of like recognizes like I'm feeling something about
Yes.
this, even though I
Yes.
can condemn it. Because Renoa says like I feel sad, or maybe if you have someone else in your party, they'll say something to that effect. Um, Having
Even
defeated them, Squall
Quistis
spares them. Yeah. Okay, so you had this. Yeah.
have to go hard next time. He said he's not going to be able to hold back, and Quistis is like Squall. There's a sense that it doesn't have to be that way, but that it is going to be that. It is a sad moment. It's like there's a real division being made after the fight, where apparently punches were held. As hard a fight as it
Hmm.
was.
So we don't fight Seifer yet. We know that Squall is like excited to see him again because he mentioned something about like I wonder if he's around here. Um, it's been a while now since we've heard any hints of Renoa's romantic interest in Seifer, so I think we can set that aside as a motivator. Um, it seems like Squall just wants to measure himself against his former rival. Um, and the stuff about Elone that's motivating uh, the Galbadians, that takes on kind of a different flavor now that we know that there is this deep-seated connection that's been forgotten. That included Seifer too, right? So there's something kind of bittersweet about um, him enthralled to this new sorceress, trying to find out something that he knew all along, right? About the the person that he grew up with. Uh, it is strongly suggested, I think, that Sid has orchestrated this at least to some extent. He is the one who, has Galbadia, or rather, Balamb Garden seeds use GFs when apparently other forces do not, right? So they, um, either signed up for this and then forgot that they did, or they had no choice and it just sort of happened to them. But he seems to know what's going on. And again, he's absent. He's kind of gone MIA for the past little while here and put Squall in charge. Um, all of the revelations that are happening here are, I think, still overshadowed by the fact that um, you know our party has not drastically improved their likelihood of actually defeating the sorceress, right? We don't know her weakness. We know she's interested in Elena, but we also put Elena on another ship and sent her off, right? So we don't know where Elena is. Right? Um, Elena could intervene at any moment and put us back in the Laguna Dream. Maybe that has something to do with how we're going to defeat the sorceress. Who knows? Right? So there's this kind of like agnostic is the word I keep coming back to about this quality of how we interact with this world, which is profoundly agnostic. Like we do not know, and as much as the player might be interested in finding out more, Squall is not really interested in finding out more about the world. He is just um, reacting, right? And Irvine says like I feel like my choices have led me here, although some would call it fate. Um,
Yes.
I don't know what else you could call it,
He
except
definitely has.
contrived
He
plotting.
this memory.
On the, yeah, yeah. So this idea again of Squall wanting to take care of himself is is it's so flawed on so many levels at this point. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this next little bit where we go back to um, the orphanage is gonna help clarify further, like what and how we're gonna accomplish this. Um, but uh, but yeah, it's very intriguing that in the course of Renoa saying like she doesn't feel like she can keep up with us anymore. Um, she emerges as by far the most complete actual personality on the party, right? The others are all literally without memory. Like it's not that they've repressed it; they've just sacrificed those memories to become um, soldiers, right? Seeds. So yeah,
It's
very
it
strange.
a lot of what it takes to become soldier in Final Fantasy VII and in the further mythos that developed, particularly in the remake. Elmira, the mother of Aerith, is very clear with Cloud when they visit that she's like, you chose to be special and to
Mhm.
fused with Mako. And I don't know if she knew about Genova cells at that time, but she's like, it's well known to normal people within Midgard that people who get infused with Mako and become soldiers, there's a price to be paid for that. And that it often involves a much shorter and various steroids, and they become amazing, the things that they can do. There are even these new like steroid games that are going to be happening in 2026, but they're huge costs to being so excellent, to being so amazing. And so I think something Renoa is mentioning that you touch on nicely is that part of the reason that these people are so exceptional is because of the tremendous sacrifices that they've made and been made to make, which is something I want to mention this again with Squall. If he really does have the ethos, the mentality that he claims to have of wanting to be the sort of conscient, self-sufficient entity that relies as little as possible on others, everything he is learning is suggesting that he is nested more and more within fate and the decisions of others who know more than he does. Because right, whether this is fate that drew him together, or clearly as you saw, which I think is the spider-like orchestration of Sid, this avuncular figure is smart. And something I think we need to start realizing about him is that he put all of this in motion ostensibly and was okay with making these decisions for us so that things happened in this way, relating to us. So
Yeah.
in some ways, everything that has happened, although Irving makes the claim that he had a constrained agency and freedom, so he did have some freedom in this, more than I could have ever imagined has actually been determined by the decisions of Matron and Sid and ostensibly fate. The fact that we are connected to all these individuals, we were brought into connection with them by the choice of somebody else, probably Sid, or by fate, or even Elone doing these weird things, even sending us back into the past. We don't even have control over our own present, right? Even the time itself. We can be sent into the past. We don't know which bed our characters will wake up in or which characters will wake up. And so I would, if Squall is not just going to grow out of this, which again, we're getting more and more opportunities for him to like be nice or play nice. Like again at Trabia, I tried to be nice to Selphie and she said, that's nothing like Squall. And he's like, whatever in his head. He's like, come on, man, I can't even try this. And
Yeah.
but as far as I'm concerned, even though I see a contrast between our physical mobility in the game and the mobility our characters have experienced in reaching the point at which they find themselves. Sure, maybe Irving has made some decisions. He's not a seed. He hasn't lost his memory. That's not true of everybody else minus Renoa. They are seeds. They have lost their memories. And at least the ones from Balamb Garden were under the direct supervision of Sid, who then brought
Yeah.
Selphie to Balamb Garden, I imagine. I don't think this was a random transferring at this point, especially given the time and what was set in motion. She came, and so she's put in place. And then they meet Irvine at Galbadia. Apparently, that's why he was chosen, even though he's either not yet a seed or is part of some other core that supports seeds or something like that. But Squall is less free in this moment, understanding the nature of his past, or rather the freedom that he may have thought that he even enjoyed is less than it has been at any moment at this moment. Now perhaps this will be liberating to him. He can make his own choices. He has more consciousness of what's actually going on. He's a little more oriented finally, not more disoriented. But it seems like his life has been and how he has come to this moment way more orchestrated by another composer than himself, than we first
Yeah.
thought, or second thought, or even third thought.
So there is a quick line, I think it's the Shumi elder who says part of what they're doing is because they can tell that these people have a tremendous destiny or a terrible destiny, something to that effect. So it's like it's something that other people can perceive about them. There's that, which they may or may not perceive about themselves. They should probably at this point.
Yeah.
Um, Although Irvine suggests that maybe they made these choices. Also, Selphie throws out the idea that, well, they can have their cake and eat it too because they can keep a diary, right? She has her diary. Why don't they all just keep a diary and then they can look back and see what they actually thought or remembered, when it stops being possible. So I think there's definitely a thing about writing that we saw from the beginning with Laguna being a journalist, right? Um, and with the kind of focus on creating beauty, whether it be cards, whether it be music, um, all of those are ways of preserving memory as well. Um, the kinds of exchanges that are happening here, uh, the longer they use the GFs, the less likely that these are going to suffice, right? So they have to fix their memories in some other form. Um, you know, the save points are not explained in game, at least so far. That's something that's just for us interacting with the game. Um, but maybe there is something like that that's possible, a kind of save point of writing down what happens before we forget. Um, Now that makes for a very strange kind of experience of gameplay. Um, but there's plenty of other RPGs where that is the mechanic for saving the game. You go over and you write down something in a book or a diary. It's it's suggested at the end of FF6, right? It's in the credits of that. There's like
It's a
this big
very
book that
interesting
opens.
conceit. I mean, you might be or frozen.
Go ahead. No.
Sorry, my internet became unstable for a moment. I was just going to reinforce your point and say that there are other movies and games that have or I can think of a movie and a novel in particular that did this. Kurt Vonnegut's Titans or Sirens of Titan, where characters are taken to Mars, have an antenna put in their brain, and have their memories wiped. But one starts named Unk starts to figure things out, and he writes them down in a book. And so every time he comes back from
Yeah.
the hospital with his memory having been wiped, he reads again what his memory was. But it also reminds me of Jonathan Nolan's Memento, where the
Yeah.
conceit is that he has tattoos all over his body. He's lost his capacity to generate new long-term memories, but he can maintain short-term memory. But he spends his entire day after he wakes up in a state of amnesiac sort of panic, reading signs all over his body and all over his home to try and reorient himself. And so this notion of like nature, right? Like learning while things are filtering out of your mind and while you're losing too is I think also sort of like the the um I'm forgetting the name for it, not the time turner, but like the sands of time when a timekeeper with sand in it. I'm forgetting the name of that for some reason, but like as time accumulates in the bottom, that means the time is running out and actual sand is running out on top. So I wonder if there's some notion of that in this too, that in order to keep gaining and progressing in the world, um, though perhaps you don't have a GF junction to you, you are doomed to forget many things. And perhaps reading through a game or playing back through a game like this. I recently rewatched the season 1 of Wednesday in expectation of the new season coming out. And I realized, even though I remembered in general what had happened, many of the specifics were new to me again. And the same thing
Yeah.
with this game. So we keep something from the games, but we lose a lot more of the specific. We keep something general, it seems, like a feeling, an effect, a certain set of impressions, maybe a few quotes. But the vast majority of what we experience, at least insofar as I'm experiencing this, re-experiencing it now, I don't remember a lot of it, even though I would say I remember this game
Yeah.
extremely well. And so perhaps the nature of the world is that if we're going to keep gaining, we have to lose more and more, my friend. A sieve is perhaps the nature of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember one of the pre-Socratic fragments. Isn't it something about how there's a recompense or justice for those who experience existence and then transfer back out again, right? Is that Anaximander? One of those pre-Socratics has a pithy statement of
Yeah,
this sort of thing.
Anaximander or Heraclitus, that there's a certain sort of punishment for having experienced becoming,
Yes,
having returned to
yes.
being. It's very uh, like the myth of bringing fire down to earth by the Titan Prometheus. That
Hmm, hmm.
that okay, you get to experience, but this is a sort of there's like a fall. It's like an injustice, and that injustice is paid for by then having to become non-being again, and that I get, but in the Anaximander sort of way of looking at it, I think you just rejoin being. And so maybe that's a more
Mm,
Christian, maybe even more Hindu and Buddhist and more satisfying way of looking at it. It would be very nice if we just experience becoming and then revert to being rather than experience being or rather becoming and then revert to non-existence entirely.
yeah.
Um, that I probably prefer that, but we'll have to see. Well, my
We
friend,
shall see.
I know I've kept you a little bit long today, and I appreciate you going down this longer side quest like the Shumi tribe. And I'm looking forward to talking to you next week, probably at a slightly different time for the listeners because I'm going to be abroad for a little bit of the time.
Mm,
So we might have to do it a little bit differently, talk about um, not necessarily just an FF8 segment, but maybe something like a piece by Professor Kozlowski on FF8. Maybe talk a little bit about Crisis
mhm,
Core. Maybe talk a little bit about what you're going to write for the Occult and Video Games Narrative conference that we're both presenting
mm.
at in a couple weeks. But we'll hash that out in the underbelly and then be ready to produce something good for the listeners again.
Yeah, yeah. Safe travels, and yeah, looking forward to talking soon.
Can't wait.